patients. It's just devastating to see. So, people ask, well, should we not wait for herd immunity via COVID? That's a very painful way to go. Whereas, the benefit of vaccinating is going to outweigh any disadvantage. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think maybe just to add on to that, I mean, as a scientist, this has really been really unprecedented. The amount of unity and everyone coming together, I mean, it's really been phenomenal. I mean, everyone in every lab that can and has worked with a virus has been working on this virus. So, I mean, it really, just the amount of people who've come together, put their heads together. But as he was saying, Tabie was saying, it's not only, the knowledge that has come together, but also the money, right? So, I mean, each of these vaccine candidates has had, some of them, $1 billion just going into one candidate. In the previous years, one vaccine would only have a quarter or less of that money to it, right? So there's been the money, there's been the knowledge, so it's been a coming together of a really key ingredients, including participants who've, come up and said, I will test this. And so it really has been, a lot of it has been because of that.
And you were one of those participants, are you not, Dom?
Indeed. Actually, I just came back today from my 3-month checkup for the vaccine trial that I was part of. So my husband and I both have participated in one of these vaccine trials. And yeah, it's been phenomenal. I'm here, I'm well, he's there, he's well. So cool. Yeah.
We will ask you the question at the end of this discussion. I want to go back to some basic questions that are flying around. If I have an underlying medical condition, we've heard about comorbidities and the risk of getting COVID with a comorbidity. So if I have an existing, and a comorbidity would be, high blood pressure or diabetes or chronic disease, should I be getting the vaccine? Should I be nervous of getting the vaccine? What's the answer to that, Jo?
So maybe I should say if you've got a comorbidity, you're even more at risk of dying of COVID disease. So you really should get the vaccine. So what's interesting with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it's safe for breastfeeding mothers. It's safe for those with comorbidities. We are a little bit reticent to vaccinate those who currently are infected with COVID because you can have a real hyperimmune response. So, and the jury's out as to how long you wait. So we think 4 weeks is safe, but the vaccine may be gone in 4 weeks' time. So, it's either if the vaccine disappears from your sites, you may still, you might settle for the hyperimmune response. So you do vaccinate. The only time we are concerned is if you have rheumatological conditions. So that's where Professor Linda Gale Becker did make the point that it's a case-by-case basis. You really need to speak with your rheumatologist or physician. Not everyone with autoimmune diseases or immunodeficiencies are suited to this virus, but it's a very small subsection, and that's where I would just advise those to get specific advice. Actually, with rheumatoid arthritis, it seems safe, but you actually don't mount enough of an immune response, especially if you're already on immunosuppressants. So I don't know if you want to add to that, but actually, if you have comorbidities, you make sure you get the virus so that you don't die of COVID disease.
And that's the message, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I think the question which you touched upon as well is if you've had COVID, should I get the vaccine? Because that's something that I get asked quite a lot.
Yes.
And the answer is yes. Not while you have COVID at the same time. As I said, 4 weeks is a good ballpark figure. But what it's going to do, it's going to act like a booster. So instead of having one injection, it's almost like you have had, the first one is your infection, and your first injection will actually be your booster. And as we know, we boost vaccines. It's like our kids get a couple of vaccines to boost the immune system as they grow. Same thing with us. So it's just going to actually boost your immune system further.
So
Nyaru, it isn't registered in pregnancy.
Not
That's
yet.
the only other thing, yeah.
All right. So you're saying we shouldn't fall pregnant?
So,
is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if you're carrying a baby. So at this stage, so remember, it's actually, we're still in the trial phase. We're still in phase 3 trialing, and we're still waiting for SAPRA approval. Yeah. But it won't be rolled out in pregnancy. There's just not enough data.
No, and there
so
generally
we just,
isn't.
Yeah.
Nyaru, can I throw a question back that you brought up right in the beginning?
Sure.
The strength of the immune response in my body based on a vaccination or based on getting COVID.
Yeah.
You were proposing that the vaccine gives you better immunity.
Absolutely. So as we have seen with this case of variants coming in, so we've seen actually that people who've had an infection with the first variant of COVID have been reinfected with the new variants. So in fact, in some of these clinical trials, people have been seeing that. So like in the Novavax trial, for example, people who were infected during the first wave were actually reinfected in the second wave, but that was prevented by, for example, the vaccine itself. So definitely you want to take the vaccine because you'll have better breadth and depth of your immune response, which means that if there are other variants that come up, you will have protection potentially from a vaccine, which you will not have if you have immunity from a variant which is not covered with the next one. So definitely.
Yeah.
So what is very interesting is that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine of all the COVID vaccines gives the best T-cell immunity. So that's hot off the press from yesterday. Isn't that interesting? Very
And T cells,
exciting.
Joe, are those cells that recognize invaders and
So
kind of pull a kill
Tabie-
switch. You know, so
You get it. So T cells have got a massive spectrum of T cells.
Yeah.
It's just, but they kind of deepen the immune system. They
Yes.
create depth in your immune system. That's probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
And that gives you memory. So
Yeah.
you remember better and you respond better.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like the tutor you have for maths.
Precisely.
You know, you're not sitting in a class of 30 people. You've got an individual tutor kind of really putting it in there in you. And it gives you just a better response over time.
And they do
Yeah.
trigger B-cell immunity,
Exactly.
B-cells or antibodies, and they do trigger an inflammatory response. Am I right? I'm remembering my basic immunology
No,
here.
they do, and they
confusing,
strengthen
you
it.
Yes,
So it's
thank
not
you.
just about the antibodies here,
Yeah.
it's about the rest and the background that controls it.
Precisely, and the very important point is the memory part, because you don't want to, a couple of years or months later to have to relearn. I mean, imagine learning math every single year, right? You just want to learn it once and then remember it forever. So that's exactly what happens with your T cells. They have memory, which means that the next time your body will remember that this is what happened before, so we must deal with it. So antibodies are a different type. I mean, antibodies transient. They come in and they go, but your memory response remains with you for a long time. So you want that.
So, Nyaru, your previous answer around better immune response on a vaccine almost answers my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Maybe, Tabie, you can pick this one up. Ryan talked about half of the Western Cape is saying, yeah, we're up for the vaccine. A quarter are we're not sure. Let's speak to those not sure who are possibly thinking, I'm going to wait until we have more information, more data, and it's safer to have the vaccine. What would you say to those people?
I think that's a very common question, and a lot of answers people give. We are waiting at the moment for the vaccine to roll out in South Africa. In the meantime, the whole world is getting vaccinated. I think up to date, there's about 200 million people vaccinated, mostly in the States and in Europe and Israel. But we are seeing what's happening there, and there's feedback from those things the whole time. So we're actually getting information already. So we are seeing what's happening. And just remember, these trials are rigorous.
Yes.
To run a trial is intense, and every little thing is reported. If you've got an itch in your nose or anywhere else, you have to report it. So we've got about 45,000 people were enrolled in the initial J&J trial. So we've got that data. So it is really rigorous, So my question is, what are you waiting for? Do you want to, you take the risk of getting the infection and feeling it for yourself, or do you want to actually just say, okay, listen, we've got the data, more will be coming in anyway, but it's been proven safe.
So let's throw that to the school scenario, and parents of other kids who are, anti-vaxxers. And again, Joe, maybe you want to speak to this because there are no vaccinations that have been designed for kids under the age of 18 yet. I think we're in trials for 15 to 17 at the moment. But how would we deal with the kind of anti-vaccine lobby that says not our family,
So I think you're asking me the hardest question, aren't you?
Well, let me throw it.
Yeah.
That's and again.
So I think it would be gently with lots of, my passion is information. So you talk through specific fears and concerns and you make compromises. So if there is a family, you look at the most vulnerable family member, and maybe they're the one to get the vaccine. And if you have a robust 20-year-old with an anti-vaxxer mom, I mean, by 20, they can make their own decision. But you would deal with it with information and with just a lot of conversation, dialogue, addressing specific concerns and getting to the bottom of, what is it that, what is entrenched in their mind. And, obviously, in a family practice, I get this thrown at me a lot, but people have some really interesting fears. And sometimes as you verbalize it, you even listening to yourself, you might think it's crazy. And, sometimes I listen, I think, well, let's just debunk that myth. Because it isn't real. It's not based on anything. But the whole point with vaccines is it's a process of choosing life, not death. It's a process of choosing to live, not endlessly live in a lockdown and without community, without connection, without being able to celebrate and laugh together and pray together and, watch our kids get married and all those sort of things. So it's just, it's a matter of making wise, informed choices. But it is a hard question. And I think it's a lot of conversations. And that's what we're trying to do tonight, is just start a dialogue and just start addressing real fears and real concerns that people do have. And try and bring as much information to the table that we can. And it's been so exciting to see, the medical fraternity come together with their collaboration and the WhatsApp groups going berserk and Tabie sharing his articles with the world. It's been incredible, really incredible.
I don't know about the world, but the Western Cape especially.
The whole of the Western Cape.
So quick scenario. We're starting to get people who are being vaccinated. Now I'm vaccinated. Can I take my mask off because I've got the vaccine? And there's a deeper question there. Maybe, Nyaru, Tabie, you want to pick up on this as well, because that mask is not protecting me, it's protecting you. So what does the vaccine do?
Yeah, so that question, this is a good question, and it's interesting because we actually haven't tested that yet. So the current protocol is that if you have been vaccinated, you should still carry on wearing your mask, because we don't know that, so you can be vaccinated and you won't get sick, but we don't know if you might still be able to shed virus. That hasn't been tested yet. So because the evidence is not there yet, would rather err on the side of caution. So please keep your mask on when you've been vaccinated.
It's also going to take a month at least from the time of vaccination to actually learn to read, build T cell and B cell immunity.
Yeah.
And I think from the data that you do have from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it is 85 to 100% effective in preventing severe disease and death, but it's only about 57% preventing mild to moderate disease. So that 43% that's out there that is not being prevented means you can still have virus that's being carried. Although you're not severely sick, you don't end up in hospital, you don't end up dying, you can still transmit it. And that's the thing I think you want to do. I don't obviously want to get it, but also looking outwards to our, the fellow people around us. We don't want to give you something we might not even know we have if it's very mild or asymptomatic.
No, precisely. And as you were talking about herd immunity, until we've reached those levels of herd immunity, we do want to keep on protecting each other using other methods like wearing masks and socially distancing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe just to pick up on the mask, Michael, the mask is an altruistic attempt to protect those around you, but I actually think the vaccine is the same. We vaccinate for community, and that's, just to add that.
Yeah. Absolutely, Jo. And maybe you want to say that again, because that's what I was trying to get, is the vaccine is not just for me. It's for you too. And I think that's been one of the most amazing parts, things that COVID has brought to the globe, is this unity as a human race fighting this little virus.
And I think especially, and case in point for myself, I got COVID in December, and I didn't know I have it because there's a phase where you're pre-symptomatic, you don't have symptoms yet, but you're very contagious. And I took it home to my wife, who's pregnant, and to my 18-year-old daughter, and they both got sick. And it's terrible, and I didn't know I had symptoms. By the time I had symptoms, I've already exposed them. We were all fine though, which is, fantastic. Grace of God, it's beautiful, and it's going very well. But it's in those scenarios, you might take something home if you don't have it. You might take it to your parents, who might not be as fortunate because just age is a risk factor. Or you might give it to somebody else that's got a problem with the immune system and they can't deal with it and they demise from it. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
A couple of quick fire questions on some myths that are flying around there while everyone sort of gathers their thoughts thinking, Tabie's got an 18-year-old daughter. Is the question...
18 months.
18 months. I thought you said 18-year-old. I heard 18 years.
I'm sorry if I said 18 years. It's 18 months.
Just checking. All right, DNA. Can the vaccine alter my DNA? That's the WhatsApp, conspiracy that's been flying around for months.
No, it's not going to alter it. It's not going to make you mutant.
Okay. What can we do while we wait to get vaccinated to bolster immunity?
So maybe I can answer that, because I have every recipe in the book. So, some of the stuff is quite evidence-based. We're seeing a definite immune boost from things like zinc and vitamin C. We use bovine colostrum, we use Moducare, we use flavonoids, so Herceptin seems to make a difference, in acetylcysteine, which is an antiviral. So we've seen glimmers of hope in immune boosters, but at the end of the day, it is mask, social distancing, and being really, following all the procedures, being really wise, living wisely, staying really healthy. So there's nothing, you can't beat a healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle. I'm afraid it's hard work, but you can't beat that. And then, yes, so you can supplement and be wise and follow all due procedure, and then do that, the healthy. So everything, enough sleep, enough social interaction,
and
all the protective longevity things.
And let your body kind of fight its disease. Jo, quick one, and again, open to anybody. Is there anyone that should not get the vaccine? And we touched on rheumatoid. I don't want to go back to that again. But is there any indication for not getting the vaccine?
So if you've ever had an allergic reaction to something that's inside the vaccine, so if you've physically had a reaction to something that is in there, then I would be hesitant to that. Then that's only contraindication to me. But at this stage, what's in the vaccine, as I said before, it's a bit of salt, it's a bit of water, it's an adenovirus. The chance of you having a reaction to that is incredibly small. But besides that, there's no real contraindication. The pregnancy is the thing that you'll have to discuss.
So I think if you are concerned, you can either speak with an allergologist, or you can have the vaccine in a controlled environment where we can give adrenaline and give, almost resuscitate you if you drop. So, that vaccine you wouldn't have in clicks. Do you know what I'm saying? You would actually do it in a clinical environment. But
just having said that, we have never had to resuscitate anybody with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Nobody has dropped on that.
So no
Thank you for that, Tabie.
Just to kind of
out of 44,000, no one dropped. So we're doing quite well. Yeah.
Quick one, and then I'm going to ask you the question, are you going to get vaccinated? But the flu jab, in the Moll family, we have an annual tradition where we do the flu jab every year. Someone draws a short straw and has to inject Dad. Are we doing the flu jab, or are we not doing the flu jab in conjunction with COVID?
So it's interesting.
Vaccine?
So this was addressed. The data coming out have said don't do it together just because of your immune system confusion. But do the flu jab at some stage because it's so confusing to get flu. We will treat you as if you've got COVID and test you, and you will be in isolation for 10 days. So it's a very inconvenient time to have flu. Having said that, I'm a screening depot for the virology department. We didn't have one case of influenza last year. With all our measures, influenza just came and went. It never hit Cape Town. So I'm not sure we're so worried about the flu, but don't bypass the flu vaccine, but don't have it at the same time. Keep a good spacing. I don't know what your spacing would be, but I would say at least 4 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
4 weeks.
Okay, we'll stick with 4 weeks.
Brilliant. Guys, we're going to wrap and pass over to Ryan in a moment, but let's quickly just go around and answer that question. Are you going to get the vaccine? Because we've heard the science, we've heard the facts. Your personal opinion.
So I'm actually very excited. I cannot lie. I'm being vaccinated at 1:40 at Rondebosch on Sunday. So I'm very excited. And the thought of not giving my patients COVID is very exciting.
Once I get it, absolutely.
No, definitely. And I wouldn't let my children take anything I haven't taken. So that's why I went for the vaccine trial, so that I could see that I'm okay. So when it's ready for my kids, I'll definitely be giving to them as well. So absolutely,
Brilliant.
yes.
Guys, thank you. And 20 minutes after Dr. Jo gets her vaccine, I'm going to be getting my vaccine in the same place. So keep the seat warm for me, Jo. But guys, we're going to open up to questions afterwards. I'm going to throw over to Ryan in a moment. If we haven't answered your questions, we've tried to answer everything for you in as much detail and as simplified detail as possible. If there are still questions, there's going to be time afterwards. Ryan, you got the tough questions coming your way, man. We haven't even touched on 5G.
We've really appreciated hearing from all of you tonight. Very insightful, very helpful, and I mean, even the way that you just listed all those things there, Jo, we're going to have to get you to do a little bit of a follow-up so we can keep up with the pace at which all those helpful things you can do to make sure that your boosting immune system currently get to you, our people. Guys, what we're going to do in this next kind of little section is really look a little bit wider than the medical elements in play with the vaccination. And so I've got two friends with me. These are both personal friends, Hugh Cole Cole. Hugh's kind of official title is Director of Policy and Strategy for the City of Cape Town. But Hugh this evening is going to be speaking in his personal capacity, just from some of the perspectives that he has, obviously out of his professional experience, but in his personal capacity. And then my mate Paul, which most of you Common Grounders know, leads our inner city congregation. Pre-being a pastor, Paul was a CA. He was also an accounts lecturer at UCT. And he's just one of those wise guys, wise buddies of mine, who I most often appreciate his perspective on these things. Not always, hey Paul? We have our differences, but most often appreciate
You have the right to be wrong. You have the right to be wrong,
That's right. Exactly. So Hugh, I'm actually going to throw the first one to you. When you see some of the implications at a kind of city level and involved in government as you are on the city of Cape Town, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you've seen the impact of COVID and just how you see the vaccine from a broader kind of city impact view.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So I think for me it's really important to step back and say, what has COVID been doing to our city? And clearly the impact is deep and wide.
Yeah.
There is of course the human impact that we've spoken about already tonight, and a colleague of mine.
From the top.
A colleague of mine at work has lost 8 family members in 6 weeks.
Wow.
Now, not all of us have been impacted in the same way, but there's that human impact, of course. But then there's also the poverty impact, and I think this has been quite widely reported. But as people have lost jobs, particularly coming through the hard lockdown, there was a serious loss of income for many, many people. And we have very good survey data across the country that tells us who was impacted. And it was the people in the most precarious jobs, insecure jobs, outside of formal contracts. Women were disproportionately affected, vulnerable groups. And it has drastically increased poverty and inequality in our city and in our country. So there's that. Then there's the essential services that, for example, the city government provides. The people who collect the rubbish and keep the water flowing are human beings, so they get sick as well. And then there's been all the lockdown measures and having to work around that. And then there's also been a rapid increase in services needed. So as people who live in backyard structures have been evicted because they've lost their jobs and aren't able to pay rent, they've had to form new informal settlements, for example, and those all need to be serviced. So there's this real pressure on service delivery across the city.
Yeah.
And then city finances and national finances. I think everyone has a sense of the sort of national financial public finance predicament that we're in. But it's also impacted provincial government, which provides health services and education services to the big functions, but also then city finances, and that means hard choices around services delivered, and then of course the economy.
Sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned to me as we've been chatting about this how almost in a sense the city budget, which is generally towards business as usual and some development components, really trying to uplift the most under-resourced areas. And there's almost a little bit of a triage happening where there's resources that are now needing to be dealing with crisis on hand, which are then slowing down some of those development components and the city being able to do. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, things like the COVID response and all the measures that had to be put in place during the course of last year, being able to enforce the different regulations, and now, looking towards a vaccine program and supporting the Western Cape Government's Department of Health in rolling that out, all of that carries a cost. And then, there also is just, revenue, city revenues are impacted, transfers from national government will be impacted. So that all just means that you have to really focus in on core priorities and make hard choices. The economic impact of COVID is, I think a lot of people have, I think we're all aware of that. But it is significant, and as we look to the future, with these new mutations that have come up, we know that COVID is not going to disappear soon. And the economic impact will continue to be very serious. And so that really then, when one looks to the future, and when I looked at the mutations and the extent of the second wave, which I think, I'd quietly hoped that the second wave would not be as severe as the first, but it was much worse. It became very clear to me that the only way out of the COVID tunnel is vaccination.
Yeah.
And that's why the 3-phase rollout of the vaccine, healthcare workers first, then essential workers plus people above a certain age, people with comorbidities, and then general population, those are the 3 broad phases, becomes absolutely critical for our country.
Yeah.
And is at the same time an immensely complex task. It's going to be one of the biggest logistical challenges the country's ever faced, and even much better resourced countries and state governments across the world are really, really battling to get vaccination rollout right.
Yeah.
So the city government's partnering with West Cape government on doing what we can to prepare for that and make it go as smoothly as possible. There's a lot of unknowns, and the biggest one is what the flow of vaccines is going to be, how many are going to be available.
Yeah.
It's super exciting that there are vaccines being rolled out in the city even today, but we don't know what the flow is going to be and how quickly we're going to be able to vaccinate.
And Hugh, just on that, do we have any sense of kind of timeline expectation for that rollout? Do we have any sense of that?
No, I don't think we have a very clear picture on that at this point. I really, couldn't give any guidance.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute and ask you another question, Hugh. But I want to, my recovering accountant friend Paul here, the economic eagle eye, pastorally, when you think about the implications of our people and what's been happening with regards to, just over the last while, the economic implications of the vaccine. Maybe you want to speak to just what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, the economy is a big machine. Maybe the good news is the fruit exporters are doing brilliantly. They really have had a fantastic time there in the Platteland, or wherever they grow fruit. So if you've got any fruit farming buddies, they're good friends.
They're doing well.
But, the Cape Town economy really needs hospitality and tourism. It's a whole ecosystem. We're fortunate to live there on the promenade, and the occupancies in some cases of hotels single digits. Some hotels have just said we're mothballing. As soon as the hotel's not there, the tour guides, the member of our congregation qualified as a tour guide months before lockdown. And this guy had this new season of life, and so it doesn't take us long to work out the knock-on effect. And I think, we often talk about, are you thriving or surviving? I think anyone in the hospitality industry in Cape Town at the moment, if you are still standing, that is like the new thriving. And just to say that, because I think there's a little bit of pressure on people to always be like, no, you got to hustle, got to make a plan. This wave has really hit some sectors a lot harder than others, and the hospitality and tourism especially. And so I think those sectors in particular affect Cape Town and our part of the City Bowl especially. And it's just to get the message out there that don't take this as a personal thing. Don't let it think that makes me now a rubbish husband, rubbish friend. It can then become pervasive, and then you can think it's always going to be like this. It's permanent, and those are 3 cycles of personal, pervasive, permanent that can really send you into a spiral. And as we've heard tonight, just chatting to some of these guys, it's not permanent, right? We've got a solution. We've got something we can work towards. There's precautions we can take. There's a vaccine on the way. And let's do our bit to really support significant sectors in a way. And people are doing that in different neighborhoods, people getting behind the local businesses, supporting those. But they particularly are taking a big hit at the moment. And quite frankly, if we don't have our vaccine house in order, tourists who've maybe been vaccinated somewhere else, they've got to look at their calendar. I think there'll be a new travel brochure
Right,
online. It'll be like, the countries that have been vaccinated, the other countries that aren't. And I think that stuff's going to impact us, not just into our country, but also out of our country, where we're going to have access. You can see some nations formalizing, because of our variant steps.
Totally.
So it's just to be good and aware that it's not just a private decision you make there that has no impact. It really is one that, as a city, impacts us greatly.
Yeah, that's huge. Hugh, you're a member of our congregation as well as being involved in city policy, etc. What do you see the role of the church being in a time like this? What would you want to say to our community members?
Yeah, Ryan, I think for me, the important thing is to realize that, of course, as we've been speaking about earlier, the vaccine is an individual choice, but we have to understand that it's an individual choice that has societal implications. So, our individual choices are going to add up to whether the vaccine achieves the protection that we all want so that life can get back to normal, a new normal probably, but back to normal. And that people can recover their livelihoods and begin to recover from the devastation that many families have experienced. And so I think, as people of faith, as believers, that we want to be seeking the best interests of the city where we've been placed. And so in making these decisions about how we respond to vaccination and how we respond to COVID, we should be seeking the best for the city, seeking the peace of the city, and I think also promoting truth, thinking very carefully about what we participate in and what we promote, and seeking to be people who promote truth and who promote what's going to be helpful and what's based on science and evidence. I think that's a really important role for the church. And I think maybe last thing, Ryan, to think, linked to that point about communicating truth, just also think about, how we conduct ourselves as believers and not compromise, our message and mission as the church because of some of these things that could really compromise our reputation with society more widely.
To you guys in a moment or two. I want to give you two things just to think about while I speak to a few of those things that I think is important for our people to hear us on as leaders. But maybe just you guys to give some thought to kind of where you stand on the vaccination. I'd love to hear that from you personally. And I'd love you each to just think of one maybe unhelpful myth that's out there that maybe you just, could speak to, or something you've heard along those lines of being truth tellers and things like that. But guys, one of the things that I've realized is that in many ways, in the context of the church, we are having to navigate a few different complexities in this regards. And there are a few things that I would almost call spiritual concerns that we want to speak to that many people have raised. And you only have to go onto the socials to see all of the different people with their different questions around, just these spiritual concerns or concerns that have a more spiritual, maybe non-medical nature. So I've got three of those that I just want to speak to very briefly, and then we're going to hear from these guys again. The first one is the vaccination the mark of the beast, or the introduction of a new world order? And many people have heard about Bill Gates and the different crews, and there's this new world order, and is this a mark of the beast dynamic? And the short answer to that is no. My follow-up answer to that is I would love to call us as Christians not to be so obsessed with the mark of the beast. I just have Michael Eaton in the back of my head, in my ears all the time. He used to say, I remember him saying those words, we have to realize when it comes to Revelation that we're dealing with symbolism and vision, and too many people are out to try and interpret and then name and, not name and claim, name and kind of denounce certain things as being of the kind of end times book. And really, I think what we have to realize when we answer that question is that this vaccine bears none of the hallmarks that we should expect of an orthodox understanding of the mark of the beast. There's no conclusion or requirement to believe anything, no compulsion towards believing anything. There's no you have to obey someone, or there's no oppression related to this. There is a choice in this. And some people would even go as far as to say, but the fact that you're going to be restricted in some way if you don't get a vaccination from being able to travel, to that, I think we need to just recognize that this is already true. Hospitals don't allow doctors to operate unless they've had vaccinations against hepatitis B. Nobody's able to travel to Kenya unless they've had a yellow fever vaccine. These are all real dynamics that are at play in our world today, and we just want to completely denounce any connection to this vaccination being related to the mark of the beast. So that's the first one. The second one then maybe is, can't we just trust God to keep us safe? And let me just remind us that the Christian worldview on this and biblical understanding is that we back the medical sciences, and the church and Christians have participated over many years in the kind of forward advancement of the medical sciences, and we want to participate in that kind of helpful way where we participate and celebrate every day. I'm not sure about you, but I personally, I appreciate so many things. I appreciate my glasses. Right now, I appreciate my dentist for my skewed teeth. I appreciate my medication, my vitamins. I appreciate my family doctor, Joe. All of these things are things that we daily participate, celebrate, and appreciate in our lives. And so Albert Muller, who's the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, he said this. He said, pressing against disease and viruses is part of our mandate. Some might say, I believe in the sovereignty of God, and if God wants me to have this virus, then he will give me the virus. I don't need medical intervention because I trust God. And I think he carries on. He says, I think that kind of logic is, if pressed to its logical conclusion, however, is untenable. We wouldn't treat any sickness, cancer, or injury if that was the case. Medical treatment is an extension of God's common grace, and Christians have always understood this. That is why throughout history, where you find Christians, you find hospitals and the church treating the sick. So we want to say, yes, God can keep us safe. We know that. But we also want to say that God can drop manna from heaven. But when people have food at their disposal, we don't have the examples of God dropping that manna from heaven. I think we should take the food that's in front of us and we should find ourselves appreciating and recognizing it as God's provision in our lives. And I know I've been in many prayer meetings over the last year where we've been saying, God, won't you give medical breakthrough so that we can see our worlds changed and helped through this COVID season. So would love us to make sure that we're not those who are having faith for God to provide and then saying, no, we're going to faith it. We're not going to take that provision in front of us. And I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying this is an understanding of the philosophy of saying, no, I'm going to rather trust God. Does that make sense? Maybe a last one here is, how do we act Christianly at this time? How do we act Christianly at this time? And I'd really encourage each of us, if you have a relationship with God, to get with God, press into him, ask him for wisdom. He loves that dynamic of us being those who run to him, particularly when it comes to a need for wisdom, a need for his understanding. Secondly, I think Hugh, you said it a little bit earlier, know what's true, check your sources, be wary of fake news, definitely be cautious about sharing links and articles. Guys, let me just say it, Bosch AM, I thank you for the numerous things that you send me, but there is a fair amount of them that I cannot take seriously, and I do some fact checking, and I've just got to put it out there. Some of the sources that you guys spread are not true. And we got to recognize that, and we've got to check our sources, right? Then lastly, I would just say, be wise in making sure you understand you're doing what you believe to be best for you and the others that are around you. And I think we all know the Good Samaritan story speaks so beautifully to being a people who aren't just about our own business, but we're a people, always God's people. Jesus used that analogy to help us understand that that's what neighborly love looks like, is for us to be aware of and concerned for others, not just about our own business. Lastly, make a wise decision. Make a wise decision. I've got a 3 kind of point decision-making grid. What has the Bible got to say about it? The Bible doesn't speak to this specifically, even though we do have a little bit of an interchange between Paul encouraging Timothy to take the known kind of medical intervention of his time to help his stomach. We don't see the Bible speaking to this directly, but he's pretty much saying, don't just drink water. How about you have a little bit of that red juice? That's good for you, right? That's what he says to Timothy. And so what does the Bible say about these things? The Bible doesn't say, thus saith the Lord, this way or that way. But secondly, what does the wisdom of the counsel of many say? Who are you listening to? To be honest, I pretty much said, I need to get well versed in this. I'm going to invite some of my friends to help me. And here they are tonight, helping hopefully more than just me tonight. And then my last one is always, what does the peace of God reigning in your heart look like? And I think we all need to find that peace of God reigning in our hearts as we seek to consider others, as we seek to know what is true, and as we seek to get with God on this matter. So I trust that's of some help to you. Coming back to Hugh and Paul, any other kind of debunkable myths that you guys have heard that you want to just speak to at all?
So I think just very quickly from my side, the myth that you are kind of hopeless and you got to wait for the vaccine to solve all your problems, especially involved in a business right now. I think maybe it's 2 years away, really, to see this whole thing rolled out. And so invest in yourself, get new skills, light a bit of a entrepreneurial flame in your heart, because really this is an opportunity to rebuild with every decision we make every day, new relationships and a city that is ready to host the world again. So
yeah, I've loved seeing guys in one industry completely closed down, and they've taken one little element of what they used to do, and they've started other businesses. They had the distribution network or whatever it is, and they've just kicked on in a new way. It's brilliant to see God just using people entrepreneurially in our economy like that. Hugh?
All right. I think you nailed a lot of the sort of myths that I would have spoken to, and certainly our medical professionals have done the medical part excellently. The one thing I would say is, I think we need to keep, rather than focusing on a sort of tangential link to something that might be in the Bible, focus on what the main body of the Bible is about. And there's a lot in the Bible about doing what's right for the most vulnerable and the poor in our society, and about taking social justice really seriously. And I think that's where we need to see the vaccine not just as an individual choice, but as something that we can do to either contribute or detract from that broader contribution to society.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Guys, we are going to head into a time of some great Q&A now, and I want to throw an ethical medical question into the mix. One of the questions that has come through is really, and I've come across this a few different times, and it's pretty much around aborted fetus cells being used in the creation of vaccinations, and what does that mean for the Christ follower? So firstly, I'd love to ask you guys if you can deal with the kind of more medical side of that, help us understand, and then we'll interact if there's maybe a more ethical element to it. You guys can wade into that and we'll back you up.
Thanks, Ryan. We were choosing to actually delete all the difficult questions and just go with the easy ones, but let's take that one on the head. Nyaru, I think there's a fairly short answer to that. Do you want to take that question?
Is this on? We do not.
Do you want to use this mic?
1, 2.
It's on.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. We're good.
No, we do not use aborted fetal cells in any of our research. It is firstly practically impossible to do that. I do not think that there would be enough, and logistically it's just not possible. So a lot of the viruses and those kinds of things are tested in the lab using immortalized cell lines. So these actually are quite like cancer. So we have, for example, the HeLa cells that I think a lot of people are aware of. These are not from a fetus, and there are cells that are growing in the laboratory that are not taken anyway from a fetus. So no, there are no fetuses that are used in the production of vaccines.
I think it's also, there's a lot of laws that govern this.
Precisely.
So there's tissue acts, you actually can't, you're not legally allowed to use
Precisely.
it. So.
You're not allowed to, you cannot. I mean, nowhere in the world would you be allowed to do that.
So, Ryan, I think that deals with the ethical issue as well, because there just aren't in vaccines. I'm not sure if there is any comment from your side.
No, I think I'd just done some reading on the concept and helping people to understand that even if that was involved in research and some people commenting on even the cells that are being used, how old they are and things like that, for us to completely separate ourselves ethically, even if they were being used and they were 40 years old and they were aborted fetus cells, the ethical dilemma of not participating in that, if that was pervasive in the rest of how we led our lives, we would not be able to function in society. And so I think knowing that it's not there and it's not being used is a great help to us, but even being able to distance ourselves from participating in something like that is a separate issue, yeah.
Brilliant. I'm going to go on to another question then, and this is one that's come up a lot. Will South Africa receive only the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, not the I&J vaccine, or others also? And should we be discerning about which vaccine we get? Simply said, is one vaccine better than the other?
So maybe I can answer that. So I think we're actually going to have very little choice in the matter. I think the Johnson & Johnson vaccine suited to South Africa. The AstraZeneca does not look like it's effective against our strain. Covishield is going to be donated to the African Union. I'm not sure. I think that the AstraZeneca will be sold, but it looks like they're planning to roll out the J&J vaccine, the one dose. It suits us, it suits our strain, and I think just a prayer point is that we really need to have enough of it. It's being flown out, 80,000 vaccines arrived today. It's been flown out every 2 weeks in batches of 80,000. So there isn't enough of it. So actually we really need to be able to source it for South Africa. I don't think there's going to be any choice, but as it happens, the vaccine suits us and it looks effective against our strain.
And the expiry date is not April, which is good. Tabie.
I'm also thinking as research develops and data becomes available, we'll only procure vaccines that's going to be effective against our variant.
Would it be safe to say, if you can get the vaccine, whatever that vaccine is available at the time?
Absolutely. I mean, so as I was saying with that analogy that I was giving earlier on, there are different ways to learn English. So there are different types of vaccines indeed, but they all do the same thing. They teach your body how to deal with COVID when you eventually, the SARS-CoV-2 when you encounter it. So it's really much of a muchness, They all mount an immune response that you need to help you. And so if there is a vaccine that you can take it.
Brilliant. Nyaru, thank you. Tabie, quick one. Numerous reports of people dying after getting the jab. How do you explain these reports?
Okay, so there's been reports and there's been a lot of fake news around this as well. So there's people that hyped it up and saying that like this old age home, everybody in this old age home, 26 of the 40 died immediately, which some of this has been complete fake news. I think the more people you vaccinate, you're going to realize that if I vaccinate 100,000 people, normally a certain percentage of those people would die naturally. So every day a certain amount of people die. And if I vaccinate you incidentally and you die, it's not necessarily, there's no cause and effect. And I think that's what we need to realize as well. Any vaccine death that's immediate, things are reported, that is absolutely reported rigorously. Yeah. But there's been a lot of hype, a lot of fake news about this, fake generation and non-accurate reporting.
And no pharmaceutical cover-ups. I mean, you talked about the whole world is behind this. There's nothing like that in terms of conspiracy theories.
I think people also realize the scientific community, we want the facts and we don't want to hide. That's the whole thing why we are scientists. We want to get the thing, even if it doesn't work. I mean, there's been billions invested in vaccines that hasn't worked and they've been retracted, they've been cancelled. So we want to see it. We don't want to hide it. We actually want to see if there's a problem.
No, absolutely. I mean, there are some vaccines, for example, that have been abandoned because they were shown to not work. So it's not the case that you have something that doesn't work and then people push it anyway. Yeah. So we do want to use things that do work.
Yep.
So.
And in those kinds of tests, a negative result is a positive result because we don't need to go down that road.
Exactly.
Interesting question, this, and we're going to say we don't know if we don't know, guys. How long will immunity last once we've been vaccinated? And once we achieve herd immunity with the vaccine, will we need to get a booster vaccine each year to cover new mutations?
So we're going to say we don't know. We think the T-cell immunity on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine may last up to 2 years. But we really don't know because we're in phase 3 trials, which means we're still rolling out the data and there's no way of knowing. We can only be hopeful that we won't need a booster yet because it will be enough of a logistical exercise to roll out the first injection, I think.
Yeah, we've only had COVID, SARS-CoV-2 for a year. So we need another whole season to come through. We haven't had that yet. So the people who have been vaccinated with this first vaccines haven't been challenged with another season yet. So until that happens, we cannot say for sure, with surety. But it seems that there could be some immunity that will last because of that memory response I was talking about. But the truth is it hasn't been tested because we haven't had enough time. Yeah. So time will tell.
Yeah. And again, from a scientific rigor perspective, what we're sharing with you is all we know at this point in time. Yeah. We will know more tomorrow, next week.
Precisely.
as well. Tabie, you were going to say something.
Yeah, this point keeps on shifting every day. Every day we know more. Every day we've got more reports coming from across the world, and just extrapolating data, you said, from the T cells, it looks like it's 2 years, which is fantastic. And there's going to be some cross reactivity. The bottom line is, the more you vaccinate, the more you have herd immunity, the larger proportion, the less chance of these mutants arising the whole time.
Yeah. Interesting question, this. I watched a UK media briefing which said their vaccine is more than one jab, can't stop you from contracting the virus, and can't stop you from spreading it. How is ours so much better than theirs? Well, we play better rugby than the Brits do, so why can't our vaccine be better than theirs? Jo, Tabie, who would like to take that?
Yeah, so I think the important thing is the vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting the infection. It's once infection is inside your body, it's how you respond to it. So it's aiming to prevent disease. The masks, the social distancing, the hand washing, that is trying to prevent infection. That's called NPIs, non-pharmaceutical, non-drug interventions. So we want to prevent disease. So we know our vaccine prevents 85% of severe disease, and after 4 weeks after injection, it's 100% severe disease prevention. So that's what we want. It's only 57% against mild disease. This has just been designed as a one injection vaccine, so it's not to do with multiple. If we get a booster that's a little bit modified, we'll see as time goes by, as we've got more information. But it prevents 57% of mild disease, so there is still a 43% chance that you can get a mild disease. We're working on getting it better, but that's why we keep on wearing our masks and doing the things until we've got, immunity that is the bigger part of the population.
Tabie, thank you. Jo, I don't know if you want to add to that. I have another question for you.
Yeah, shoot.
And again, this is maybe, let's talk about the rollout of the vaccine in terms of who gets it first. What does the queue look like? Because the question is, I agree with getting the vaccine. Should we not prioritize it for those more at risk from COVID-19 or practicing medical professionals? Now, that's exactly what we're doing. Hugh could talk to that as well.
So I think we need healthy doctors to look after the sick, which is why we're prioritizing the medical doctors who are in the, on the front line. So which is to me quite a sensible approach. So that's phase one. Phase two will be individuals over 18 at risk, people over 60. It will be essential workers and people in what we call congregate settings, so jails and old age homes and that sort of thing. Phase three is everyone else. So we know we have to vaccinate the doctors so that they can still look after the sick. Actually, that is just the priority, unfortunately.
And with that, the nurses we include.
And the nurses, sorry.
So
it's frontline workers.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah, Linda Gale pointed out that 6,000 or something like 6,500 medical professionals were hospitalized for COVID, and we lost 680 of our colleagues to COVID.
And interestingly, 44,000 healthcare workers have had COVID in South Africa. So that's a lot of COVID.
Yeah.
You've got a 7 times increased chance of getting COVID if you're a healthcare worker.
Brilliant. Jo, here's a question for you around the virus. So we've been talking about the vaccine and the long-term effects of the vaccine, which, guys, the answer there is we don't know, to what Nyaru was saying. We will know more. But what about this concept of the long haulers, this COVID that stays around?
So I think that's a very important question, because I think the long-term effects of COVID are hugely going to affect us economically. So we're seeing this in our practices where patients have had COVID and they go into what we call long COVID, or either post-viral chronic fatigue syndrome, or have very unusual complications of COVID. So new onset hypertension, new onset diabetes, we're seeing peripheral neuropathies, we're seeing neurological problems, we're seeing all sorts of very weird syndromes, which delights us as doctors because it's so interesting.